Moshe Taragin here from Acțion for the OU All Parsha video series for Parshas Pinchas. The Sefer of Bamidbar is nicknamed by Chazal as Chumash HaPekudim. Every Sefer in the Torah has a nickname. Sefer Bereshis is either Sefer HaYetzirah or Sefer HaYisharim. It's the Sefer with two nicknames. Sefer Shemos also has two nicknames. Sefer HaGeula is also called Sefer HaSheni. Look in the introduction, the Ramban's introduction, is Sefer HaSheni, because it's I think the Netziv actually quotes it, not the Ramban. Vayikra is called Toras Kohanim, Devarim is called Mishnah Torah, and our good old Sefer Bamidbar is called Chumash HaPekudim. It's called Chumash HaPekudim because it's book-ended by two different censuses, or censi, which are conducted, one in Bamidbar/Naso, two in Parshas Pinchas. They're separated by several parshios, but historically and chronologically, they're separated by 38 years. And the census, and the way the census is conducted, demonstrates the different stages of where Am Yisrael was before the great fall and the 38 years of death and darkness, and where they are now in Pinchas. This is not a share about the way the census is conducted, but pay attention to whether the Nesim were involved or weren't involved, what they counted, how they were counted, the sequencing of the Shevatim biologically, or based on the Machane back in Parshas Naso, or Parshas Bamidbar Naso. Anyway, one of the big differences, which Hashem we will talk about today, is were they counted by Shevatim or were they counted by Mishpachos? In the first census in Parshas Bamidbar, we see the numbers and we see the names of the Shvatim and the numbers per Shevet. In this week's Parsha, in Pinchas, we have a list of each family, and then we have the final tally of the Mishpachosehem. So, for example, Ela Mishpachos Hashimoni, after we've listed all the families of Shimon, 22,200. 22,200, correct. So, there is a stress upon families in Parshas Pinchas, which is less, is invisible. We don't really see families in Parshas Bamidbar and Naso. And this is the reason why there are very interesting little anecdotes mentioned in this census that you wouldn't feel that necessary. After all, you're counting 600,000 males between 20 and 60. You would think that you don't have to iterate a few of them who unfortunately passed and tragically passed. And yet, we go all the way back to Aaron Onan. When Yehuda is mentioned, Vahu b'nei Yehuda mishpachasam l'sheila, mishpachas hashelani, and the Torah actually mentions that Ervi Onan died all the way back in Parshas Vayetze, because they had a chance to build family, and they were meant to build family, and they were meant to not just build the classic family, but to build a surrogate family, especially Onan, and they didn't, they failed. Or Bnei Korach are described here, not just because it's recent, or Nadav and Avihu are described their death, Benot Tzalafchad are described the loss of their father, because this list is family-centric, how to build families in Am Yisrael, and whatever that means without getting into that. But when the families are listed, the Torah is an interesting description. So I'll just start with Reuven, because that's where Rashi mentions it. Reuven, Bechor Yisrael, as I mentioned before, Reuven comes first. Bnei Reuven, the children of Reuven, are Chanoch, Mishpachas HaChanochi, Lefalu, Mishpachas HaPalui, Lechetzron, Mishpachas HaChetzroni, Lecharmi, Mishpachas HaKarmi, Ela Mishpachos, not Reuven, but Ela Mishpachos HaReuveni. Now, I'm not going to go through all 12 of them, but trust me, it's the same phenomena throughout the entire list. Namely, each family is described not just by their name, Bnei Shimon, Mishpachas Zemlin and Moel, but Mishpachas HaNemu Eli, and Mishpachas HaShimoni. Mishpachos HaShimoni, the various families of Shimoni. So there is a Hey and a Yud added to the name. Instead of Mishpachos Shimon, Ha-Shimoni. Obviously, if you need the Hey, you have the Yud. They go together. So why it's described that way, what's the literal meaning, not for now. But Rashi has a beautiful medrash, and I want to hone in on that medrash. Rashi talks about let's first describe what happens and then why it happens. The application or the addition of Hashem's name to each family, both particular families as well as the broader families. So Reuven comes from of course, I just got distracted. Sorry, Reuven gets a hey before the word Reuven and a yud after the word Reuven. Ha Reuveni. Shimon gets a hey and a yud. Hey and a yud, of course, represent the name of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So effectively, Hashem's name is being applied to each shevet and to each family. Now, why is HaKadosh Baruch Hu's name being applied? The Medrash has a very interesting but practical and logistical reason. Because now that we're entering Eretz Yisrael, to enter Eretz Yisrael, you need to be pedigree. You have to come from Avram Avinu, to whom the land was promised. Jewish pedigree is always important, but it's even more important where you're fulfilling an ancient promise made to Avram. If you're not part of Avram's descendants in any way, shape, or form, then you can't be part of the Jewish legacy and the Jewish destiny. And so it was when Ezra returned after the second Beis HaMikdash. There was an accounting, and Ezra, the famous fourth parak in Kiddushin, there were 10 different Yuchsin, Asara Yuchsin, Alu, Ezra Mibavel, and Ezra had to filter them, and of course they were plagued because of all the rampant intermarriage with non-Jewish wives that took place in Bavel in Persia. I don't know what's going to happen when we return. To a degree, we believe this is part of Eliyahu's job to come and be Mitaras Tameim and to help us work through our pedigree. So this is a moment not just to count the Jewish people, but to confirm and verify their pedigree. And remember, these are children or grandchildren of slaves, and slaves don't have much control over their marital lives and marital comings and goings. They can easily be enslaved, not just to work, but to breed. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu is confirming, no, despite the slavery, despite the servitude, despite the persecution, your pedigree is intact. And to demonstrate that your pedigree is intact, I will apply my name to your families, not to your Shvatim. Shvatim is not pedigree. Shvatim is just a more of a state-wide or federal-wide identity. But families are based on pedigree. And Hashem saying your families maintained their pedigree even under trying conditions. And this, of course, takes us back to Mitzrayim, takes us back to the stories of Tachas HaTapuach HaRarticha, of the Bischar Nashim Sidkanios, of the women who met their husbands in the field, and even though the husbands were busy with backbreaking work, they put on makeup, and they had children in the fields and under the apple trees, and those women then donated their mirrors to the Mishkan to be used in the Kir. You know all the stories and all the unfolding, and if you don't, now's not the time to discuss it. So there's a very specific reason that Hashem's name applies to families in particular, because Hashem wants to attest and to testify to our preserved pedigree. Zooming out from the Medrash, I think there's a larger story at play here. And it's a story that's taking place today in Israel, which is why I want to talk about it. And I think the story in Israel that is parallel to this story is a metaphor for something larger happening in Israel, which I'm not really sure that many people in Chutz La'aretz fully understand and fully appreciate, but it is a major issue. So let's start from the beginning. Taking Hashem as part of your name, putting Yud K in this case, even though it's backwards, as part of your name, isn't just technically that Hashem is testifying and affirming your pedigree. It's a moment of confidence. Would you want to have Hashem's name in your name? That's a little too close for comfort for some people. I'm sitting here in my room looking at I don't have the Sefer Torah, we have a Sefer Torah that rotates from family member to family member. So right now it's not in my house, in one of my brother's homes, but a lot of times when people are asked to house a Sefer Torah, it makes you a little bit awkward because, well, then how will that affect my behavior? And maybe there's certain types of behavior that I would prefer to continue and maintain, but I'm not comfortable with there's a Sefer Torah staring at me. So that same feeling is when Hashem's in your name. If Hashem is part of your name, then it's a very intimate, compelling, vivid part of your experience. You hear your name called all the time. And if you hear Hashem's name within that, and you have to be very confident and feel very close to Hashem. And this is a new generation, and they're less scarred by all the mutinies and failures of the previous generation. They're on the doorstep of Eretz Yisrael. They can feel it, they can see it, they've seen the Nisim, and there's a level of confidence and closeness and intimacy that makes this very natural and less frightening. Ask yourself whether the Dor of the Meraglim would have been happy having Hashem as part of their name. And of course their names didn't. They were Sisor ben Michael, Nachbi ben Vavsi. But here, not individuals, but family names, and presumably this carried on to individuals as well, had HaKadosh Baruch Hu as part of their name. So to me, it's not just the specific aspect of the Medrash that Hashem is confirming Jewish pedigree by applying his name to the names of families and the names of Shvatim, but there's almost like an engagement ring. Hashem is saying, we're closer now than we were, and let's maintain that closeness, and therefore my name is your name. You can put my name into your name. You can integrate my name into your name. Now, why is this a story that happened thousands of years ago, but it's very, very iconic? And of course, the child really doesn't have a say. It's the parents downloading their hopes, their feelings, their experiences into the child. You were a little baby when you received your name. Our parents decide our names. Typically, the custom, at least for the last couple hundred years, has always been, especially, depending on Ashkenazi or Sephardi, has been to name after relatives. In the Ashkenazi world, departed relatives, that people don't name after living ones. In the Sephardic world, even after living relatives. But living or dead, it's that you're naming after family, and by renaming and recycling the same names, you're maintaining family continuity. So if my name is Moshe Yitzchak, and I'm sitting in my room, I'm not going to turn the camera, but I've got 6 pictures on my wall, the other side, not this side, and some of them are my Rebbeim, and some of them are family personalities and Rabbanim of mine, or in my past, my ancestry. One of them I'm looking at right now is Moshe Yitzchak, who was one of the 10 Balei Musar in Kelm. Unfortunately, he was killed in the Holocaust, and I feel deep continuity because I am his great-grandson, and I want to continue his legacy, and not just his legacy, but by connecting to him, I connect to his son, my Zaidi, I connect to his father, I named my son after his father, so my son is carrying his father's name, so there's a lot of continuity, and continuity is the cornerstone of religious faith and belief, Masara, and feeling part of something larger and wanting to maintain and preserve that which other people have worked for. So you look to your past and you hook up with your past through names. Now, anyone who's been to Israel recently or has relatives in Israel recently knows that the top has been blown off of this custom. And Israelis are discovering and exploring many new reservoirs of names. One of them, which is relevant to Parshas Pinchas in the direct sense, is people are starting to name, and again, not just in Israel per se, but people who are influenced by the spirit of Israel, by the cultural gusts of Israel. So Hashem's name is now being included more frequently than in the past. So in the past, which is a classic name, Shmuel, not so much Yishmael, but maybe Emmanuel here or there. But now people are starting to conjugate names that have Hashem's name in there. Amiel, Aviel, Adiel, Da'el, Liel, Shir'el, Pada'el. There's a lot of Hashem's name, and they're all beautiful names. I know Hashem, I'm an ornament to Hashem, Hashem's my ornament, I hear Hashem, I know Hashem. And I think that reflects a confidence that Israelis have in their relationship with Hashem, a confidence that comes from a visceral sense of feeling Hashem's presence. You can feel Hashem's presence by walking into the Beis Medrash and studying Torah. You feel Hashem's presence by walking into shul and davening, by performing a mitzvah. But what happens when it's all-encompassing and it's holistic and you feel like you're living HaKadosh Baruch Hu's nevuah, sacrificing comfort and security because you feel Hashem wants. This morning, I got up at 5 a.m. Our good friends, the Chotim, decided to wake us up. So we got up for a zikin and think all the time about the beginning of the Shulchan Aruch. Gibar Kari, Kam Kari. So this week's Parshas, I'm actually recording this a little bit early because I have to travel. So it's actually still Parshas Balak. So Am Kalavi Akum, Kara Vatz Kari, Kalavi Mikumenu. So they made us be Makai in the pasuk in the literal sense. Look at Rashi on Hein Am Kalavi Akum. They get up in the morning and they get up to daven. So this morning we got up to daven at 5 and went back to sleep. But you and I both know you don't really fall back asleep. Anyway. So there's a confidence that comes from feeling HaKadosh Baruch Hu's presence. Tamid Einei Hashem Elokecha Ba, She'einei Taras Hashem Elokecha Tamid. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is Daresh Tamid. But it's not just that people are starting to discover new naming schemes with Hashem's name based on the confidence and the intimacy at the cost. There's a cost. And that's a cost that a lot of, and I'll describe it first and I'll talk about other names, a lot of non-Israelis don't realize. Life in Israel is delicately perched between preserving tradition, but also realizing that we're pioneering a new era. And part of pioneering a new era, if you believe that it's a new era, is discovering new expressions for religious identity, Jewish identity, and it's very confusing for non-Israelis, because outside of Israel, or outside of the influence of Israel, you remain in your lane, and your father took lulav and esrog, and you take lulav and esrog, and your father put on tefillin, and you take tefillin. Your father, and more or less you translate into a new generation, to a new era, but it's more or less the same, and some people get frustrated by that, because it's harder to find personalization and authenticity, where you feel that you're just repeating and recycling, especially if it's hollowed out of meaning, and you're just involved in performative acts, and you're not really transformed by the experiences. In Eretz Yisrael, the challenge is to look back and to look forward. And we want to look back to our Masorah. And Jewish history didn't begin in 1948, obviously. But as we explore new areas, and those new areas are surfacing in names. A lot of people are naming their children based on landscapes, parts of Eretz Yisrael. I have a grandchild named Nahari, Eden, the rivers of Eden. And that's really not a name after a great-great-grandmother. But it's a deeply spiritual name, and when the name was given with a deep sense that we're trying to rebuild. Again, I'm not going to speak in the name of my children who gave the name, but it evokes the psukim in Parshas Bereshis, V'nahar yotzeh me'eden. It evokes imagery of Achris Hayamim, where rivers will come out of the Beis Hamikdash and will rebuild and rehabilitate a fallen world. They're very, very deeply spiritual, but their spirituality doesn't draw solely from the well of Masorah. That's a good way to say it. There are many new wells of inspiration that are becoming very compelling and very powerful in Israel. And the challenge is to draw water from those wells while still drawing water from the well of the Masorah. And that's what makes life in Eretz Yisrael, one of the factors, so complicated. I know there's all big debates, and Rabbanim are saying, don't make Aliyah because your children will struggle religiously. This is not the forum to get into those conversations. I just want people to understand that the challenges are challenges we want to face, because we want to expand our avodas Hashem. We want to make it as broad as possible. Chazal say the Gemara in Brachos, Miyam shecharav beis hamikdash ein lakadosh baruch hu ba'olamo ela dalet amos shel halacha bilvad. The way that I read that Gemara is, before the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, HaKadosh Baruch Hu's sweep was much more panoramic. Once we lost the Beis Hamikdash monarchy, statehood, sovereignty, culture, language, whatever we lost, then Hashem shrunk into the Beis Medrash. The good thing about Hashem shrinking is the Dalet Amos Shel Halacha are infinite and cosmic. So he didn't really shrink, and it's self-sustaining, and it sustained us. But now we're going back to Israel, and how do we fortify Halacha, Torah, and everything we've done beforehand, and also stretch it to these new areas that make it more holistic, and rather than just being located in the Beis Medrash. That's the secret of life in Israel, especially if you buy into the fact that this is part of a larger historical messianic process, however you call it. If you feel this is just anecdotal, this is the sideshow, for our purposes, the Turks and the British could be ruling Israel. It's a little bit nicer because they're Jewish, they keep Shabbos, and they give us more money for yeshivos. Then you're still drawing from only one well, the well of the Masorah. But once you start to draw from many wells, you could forget the well of the Masorah. And this is all happening in names. So people are naming after, not after, but incorporating Hashem's name much more. People are naming after landscapes because geography in Israel is very soulful. People are going to Yulim, not just for a break, like you'd go to the local park and look at the ducks, because this is our land. This is where Avos went, and the love for this land and the knowledge of this land, which I don't really have, because you have to really grow up in Israel to have it, or you have to make it up. You have to spend a lot of time. And I don't spend a lot of time in Tiyulim. I spend more time in the Tiyulim of Shas and the Tiyulim of Vayi and Rava. But people are really deeply, deeply committed as a way to encounter HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Kabbalah has become an extremely, extremely interesting resource or a source for Tanakh, obviously, but not just the names in Tanakh that you and I recognize, Shmuel and Aaron and Moshe and Devorah and Rivka and Rachel, but lesser known personalities in Tanakh. And I'm not just referring to Yael. I don't know how many great-grandparents were named Yael, but that's already more of a, so to speak, normalized mainstream name. But secondary figures, minor Nevi'im that people in the past were not named after, and how many people were named Chavakuk in the past. So all of a sudden, the naming in Israel is reflective of a larger enterprise. And that is a very soulful enterprise, and it's part of Avodas Hashem. But the delicate art is, as it always is in life, not just in Eretz Yisrael, trying to find that sweet spot between breadth and depth. And anyone who thinks about life and development, especially from a religious perspective, knows that's the gold cup. That's the elusive gain. How do you broaden? Because in breadth comes knowledge, wisdom, holism, panorama. You feel Hashem, you feel religion, but it's always going to come at the cost of depth. Someone once asked me how I define a gadol. Rav Amital's yahrzeit is next week. Rav Aaron's yahrzeit was a few weeks ago, and I had the schus to be in the presence of real gedolim. Unfortunately, not everyone knows enough about Rav Amital to appreciate what his personality was, what his impact was. And I say sometimes they give the answer, part of it is this combination of breadth and depth. How many, if you made a list of 10 religious traits and asked who modeled those traits for you in life, how many of you listening to this shir are thinking of one person? Make a list of 10 traits, good mental experiment, a list of 10 traits that you think are fundamental to avodas Hashem, fundamental to human character, humility, prayer, piety, tefillah, selfless, whatever they are. And then attach a person to each of those traits. I think in most cases, people are thinking of 2 or 3 people, at least. What happens when you meet one person that models all of them? That's a consistent message. You don't have to patch together different personalities. It's more of a kazare, a kaddish. You can walk in their shoes, walk in their footsteps. But that's just part of it. Okay, now how deeply do you live those traits? It's easy to say, I'm going to try to be a Renaissance man and cover all bases and cover all traits. But at some point you'll dilute. It's just much easier to just focus on one trait. I'm going to be the biggest Talmid Chacham. I'm going to be the biggest Baal Chesed. I'm going to be the biggest Baal Midos. I'm going to be... And it's in that combination between people that cover a broad range of traits and live those traits extremely deeply and set standards that other people are always haunted by and driven towards, the gadlus or gadol lies. And at least to me, right? I think, let's say, if you are someone who's affiliated with the Haredi culture, there really is only one ticket of entry. There's one part of the gadol profile, the person that knows the most Torah, assuming there's a more or less balanced humility, commitment, piety, whatever. But when the decision to who's going to be the gadol is more or less is who's the biggest Talmid Chacham, who's the Sgan Hador, who knows the most Torah, coupled with all the other traits. And to me, a gadol is someone that has all those traits and lives them very, very deeply. So that's our challenge in Eretz Yisrael, and the challenge is reflected in names. So the next time you call up your daughter or your granddaughter and they name a name that you find weird or strange, and why isn't it Rachel, and why isn't it Rivka, why isn't it Shoshana, which itself is a new name, but why isn't it Moshe, David, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, or even Yiddish names, right? You're not getting many Yiddish names in Israel today because linguistically Yiddish has been completely replaced by Hebrew here in Eretz Yisrael, at least in our circles. And there's so many other options. And so even those that do look back to the past, they're taking Hebrew words that fit rather than Yiddish words that don't often fit. And it's just different. Look, I'm part of a generation, and all my children are named in the more or less classic name. I mean, I'm not going to say my children's name. I don't like to compromise their privacy. But they're all normal names. They're all names you'd hear, and you say, well, I can go down the block in Lakewood, or go down the block in Brooklyn, or Los Angeles, or in London, and find the same names. But then as you meet the next generation, my grandchildren, you can hear some very unique and different names. And for people that don't know what it means, it becomes the source of a joke, or it's not a joke. It's something very deeply and very spiritual, very soulful. It's not a joke. And understand it, and appreciate it, respect it, and realize that it's part of pushing back frontiers and discovering horizons to avodas Hashem that just couldn't be explored in the past and now are. Whether it's agriculture, landscape, Kabbalah, Tanakh, name of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, names of soldiers who fell, just to commemorate people, naming after soldiers, after heroes. So naming is iconic, naming is symbolic, and Parshas Pinchas reminds us of how resonant names can be.